exclusive right to regulate international commerce as well as interstate commerce. On Tuesday, we'll start with the Commerce Clause. It's an interesting clause. There's a lot of meat to that clause. All right, this is timely. Which branch of government is in charge of impeachment?
Legislative branch.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and they're doing it right now. The House of Representatives has the sole power to bring an impeachment charge, which is the equivalent of an indictment. They charge the president, and that requires only a majority vote of the representatives in the House. Then it goes over to the Senate, what's the vote that's required in order to actually remove a federal official?
2/3 of the Senate.
It's 2/3 of the Senate. It's incredibly unlikely that any action, any conviction will occur for the second impeachment trial of former President Trump. That seems extremely unlikely. All right, what about the creation of laws? I mean, we typically think of Congress as the law enacting branch, right? I guess, along those lines, the executive branch is typically deemed to be the law enforcement and the administrative branch. And then the judicial branch is typically looked at as the law interpretation and adjudication branch. But in terms of making laws, creating laws, is that a sole function of Congress, or is there a shared responsibility?
Well, Congress has to originate it, and then it has to go through a bunch of different processes through president and then other vetoes that can happen.
All right, well, let's expand on that. Bill origination. Each bill definitely does originate in one house, and then it needs to go to the other house, and they need to pass it. That bill will be then passed along and delivered to the president. And the president can either sign the bill, in which case it becomes law, or he can veto the bill. If he does nothing within a 10-day period, not including Sundays, then it automatically becomes law, except for one instance. If Congress is actually not in session, which prevents the president from returning a veto, the president can basically do nothing. And if Congress is not in session at that time, that's considered a pocket veto. Even though the president doesn't sign it, that's the equivalent of a veto. It's referred to colloquially as a pocket veto. But typically speaking, the president has 10 days to either sign it, in which case it becomes law, or to veto it. So what you see here is there's like a legislative partnership between the executive branch and the legislature. What happens if the president does veto a bill? Is that it? Is Congress without recourse?
No, Congress can vote on undoing the president's veto.
Okay, and how is that done?
I believe it needs either, I think, a 3/4 vote from the House or something.
It actually takes a 2/3 vote of both houses to override the president's veto. Once they have the 2/3 vote, the bill becomes law. So it is a process. And again, you can see there's a lot of friction and conflict that can happen. But again, the founders were relying on that type of friction. Each branch exercising their authority,
Yeah,
but
true.
making
I
sure
don't
that
want
the
to
other
break
branches
when
exercise
people-
only to the extent that they have
That's why I don't have
constitutional
my headphones
authority.
on. I had to, I had to be cautious.
All right, let's see. Do we have any others? Okay, judicial matters.
My keyboard loud as fuck.
What about judicial
I'm
matters?
trying to
Who has power and authority when it comes to judicial matters?
Noise, bro. I turn on 497.
The executive and the judicial. I only say the executive because he appoints judges.
Okay, so the president definitely has, some responsibility, some power for the judicial branch because the president appoints all federal judges, including Supreme Court justices. So does he do it alone, or is there a check on his power to do that?
I believe the legislative checks on his power to do that.
Well, yes, it's specifically the Senate. So again, the president has the power and authority to appoint all federal judges and Supreme Court justices, but he can only do it with the advice and consent of the Senate. So immediately after the president has nominated a federal judge or Supreme Court justice, the Judiciary Committee of the Senate will convene, and they will conduct a confirmation hearing. So that's another check, but that's in terms of appointing judges and justices. What else? I mean, obviously, through its power of judicial review, the judicial branch has authority and power, and they can decide actual cases and controversies that come to the court. So they have that power. What other power does Congress have over judicial matters?
The jurisdiction of federal courts, they determine that?
They do. The Constitution says that there will be one Supreme Court and also inferior federal courts to the extent that they are set up by Congress. Congress has the power over the jurisdiction of the courts. And that brings up an issue that I think may actually be hotly debated pretty soon. Does Congress have the ability to expand the number of justices on the Supreme Court? FDR tried to do it right around the Depression. To pack, it was referred to as trying to pack the Supreme Court. Does Congress have the power to do that?
Technically, in the Constitution, it doesn't state how many justices there are to sit on the court.
You're exactly right. And the only reference to a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court comes in the impeachment provisions of the Constitution. So the Constitution says that when a president is being impeached, then the Chief Justice shall preside over the trial in the Senate. Other than that, the Constitution does not say that there needs to be a Chief Justice, and it does not specify the number of justices on the Supreme Court.
Like Levi.
We've had as many as 10. Lincoln bumped it up to 10. After that, it was it started with, I think, 6. It's been by Congress actually moved it to 5 at one point, but never. That was going to happen after there was a resignation or retirement or death of a judge, and that never happened. Another Congress came in and bumped it back up to 6. But for the last 150 years, there have been 9 justices on the Supreme Court. And I think it's going to be a hotly debated topic if the Democratic Party decides to go after the number of justices and expand that. So we'll see how that happens. But in any event, you can see that there's quite a bit of involvement of the three branches of government when it comes to judicial matters. All right, any questions about that, about separation of powers? And sometimes we have exclusive powers. I mean, the president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. That's an exclusive power. The other branches of government do not direct the armed forces. They pay for it, but they don't direct them. Any other questions about that? Separate powers, exclusive powers?
So I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
When it comes to impeachment, I know that Congress does it, but if it comes to like impeaching a member of Congress, does the legislative branch still reside and go through the entire process as if a president was being
Yes,
impeached?
and let's think about this. The democratic process that we go through to elect, a representative in the House or a senator or a president, there's a democratic process that we go through, okay? The only way to remove a federal official, okay, an elected official or an appointed official, so this applies across the board, any federal official, the only way that they can be removed from office is through the impeachment process. And that is the sole power of Congress. So by a majority vote in the House, okay, a charge of impeachment is brought up. So that it only takes a majority of the House to charge a federal official. But it requires a 2/3 majority of the Senate to actually convict and remove that public official, that federal official. Did that answer your question? Great. All right, let's go over the basics though, in terms of the way our federal government is organized. So we've talked about this. Let's see. Let's start with our legislative branch, and these are the basics.
Professor, I think there's a student that's trying to get your attention.
Oh, really? Who?
Me, Professor? I'm sorry. This might be a dumb question, but I just want to make sure that I'm on the right page. So the judicial branch is the federal courts and judges. The legislative branch is the Senate and House of Representatives, and the executive branch is the president.
Exactly, and all the administrative agencies are also deemed to be part of the executive branch.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, so we're good on that. All right, but let's go through and see if we can understand the way our federal government is organized. All right, so the legislative branch is considered a bicameral legislature. What does that mean? Bicameral.
It means that it's made up of two different houses. One would be the House of the Representatives with 435 members, and the other the Senate with 100 members, two from each state.
That's exactly right. There are two houses. The upper house, or the higher house, is always deemed to be the Senate, and the lower house is the House of Representatives. And the founders, not everything was based on pure democratic principles. And here's an example of it. The House of Representatives, they are apportioned, those 435 members are apportioned to the states based on population. And that population is determined every 10 years in the Senate. So pretty soon we are going to have a reapportionment of those 435 members. And that is a little bit more democratic than, let's say, the Senate. You take Rhode Island. Okay, Rhode Island, I don't even know. Maybe they have 1 million residents in Rhode Island, and we've got 40 million in California. But still, each state only gets 2 senators. And so this was just a way, when the founders were creating our Constitution and creating our federal government, sometimes they gave power to the people. Sometimes they gave the power to the states, and they did this in certain ways in order to maintain balance. There were some issues that they felt it was still important for the states to have priority, and then there was other times where the citizen would have priority. All right, so let's talk about term of office. Somebody jump in and tell me what the term of a representative in the House is.
2 years.
It's every 2 years. They run for office every 2 years. How about a senator?
6 years.
It's 6 years, exactly. And they are, the Senate is divided into 3 groups. They're staggered. So every 2 years, 1/3 of the Senate will be up for re-election or election if there's no incumbent. But every 2 years, we're definitely going to have an election. Every 4 years, that election of our Senate and our House will coincide with the presidential election. And then you have a midterm election. So every 2 years, the House is up, the entire House will be up for election. The Senate, it's staggered into 3 different groupings. And 1/3 of the Senate every 2 years will be up for election.
I know, bitch.
What are the qualifications?
I'll be the Titan.
Go ahead, Alexis.
In order to be qualified for the election, the president must be at least 35 years old and a natural birth citizen of the United States.
All right, you're jumping a little ahead on me. I'm talking just about the Congress.
Sorry.
Oh, don't worry. It's fine. I just wanted to stay focused on the legislative branch for right now, but I'm going to come back to you when it's time to talk about the president's qualifications. So in order to be qualified for election, representatives must be 25 years old, and senators must be at least 30 years old. Do they have to be a naturally born citizen of the United States?
No.
No.
They don't necessarily have to do that. And when we talk about the powers, I mean, the basic function, as I mentioned earlier, of Congress is to enact laws. But they have a lot more power. And just if we look at Article 1 of the Constitution, it enumerates several powers that are specific to Congress, such as the power to tax and spend, we talked about that, to coin money, to declare war, make laws, and also regulate interstate commerce. They also handle immigration matters. So they have quite a collection of powers. But then again, they have limited powers. Congress can only exercise power to the extent that the Constitution enumerates that power.
The sound's loud,
So,
like 100 volumes.
So we look at, if we just think that Congress has certain enumerated powers, there's probably 16, 17 different provisions of power in the Constitution in Article 1. There's one provision that comes at the very end of it, which actually expands on the enumerated powers, and that's called the necessary and proper clause. So if you think of, there's about 17 different enumerated powers that Congress has, and at the very end of it, it says that Congress shall also have the power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the enumerated powers. So it's a little bit of an elastic expansion of power under what's known as the necessary and proper clause. And again, impeachment is one of those powers as well. So any questions, just taking a look here at Congress, the legislative branch, and the way it is organized. Go ahead, Alexis. And one thing to keep in mind before you say anything, I actually can see you. I can only see about 5 students when I'm sharing my screen, but if you raise your hand, I might not see it. So you're going to have to jump in, vocally, probably.
Okay. It said, so the president can only be elected for 2 consecutive full terms.
That's true.
Is there any way that a vice president could be in office for 2 consecutive terms and then be a vice president again?
I don't know the answer to that.
He's a bitch.
He could, let's say, if there's less than 2 years remaining on the current president's term, but then that president dies and the vice president serves out the remainder of the president's term, that vice president can still be elected to 2 full terms. Okay, so approximately 10 years being in office. I'm thinking about if he takes over the president's term, and then he spends, I don't know the answer. I don't know. I do know it with respect to the president. The president is limited to 2 full terms, plus any stub term that would have been left over, actually fulfilling the obligations of the president if the prior president were incapacitated or died. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so let's go the executive branch. Is the president and the vice president, are they elected by the direct vote of the people?
No.
How are they elected?
By the Electoral College.
That's exactly right. So this is another situation where the founders did not want to just rely on pure democracy. Here, the concept of electing a president, that was solely a state function. The states elect the president, and they do it through the Electoral College. And the reason for that is if we did it just by direct vote, there are certain states that are very populous, such as California. We have 40 million people in this state. And California could actually be overrepresented in a presidential election by direct vote. But by limiting, for instance, let's say President Biden was elected by 30 million people in California, and let's say only 10 million people voted for President Trump. California only gets 55 electoral votes, no matter how wide the margin is. California can act on those 55 electoral votes, or 53, I'm not remembering, but California, if everything was based on a direct vote, California can really, with its greater population, can really command who's going to be our president. The populous states definitely have that advantage, but the founders wanted to give this to each state. Each state would get a certain number of electoral votes. How do we determine the electoral votes, the number?
Population, right?
Well,
actually, no, I'm sorry. It's by the district.
Well,
the
there's
districting of the people.
538 total electoral college votes, and it's calculated based on what I've got on the screen right now. 535 are based on the number of representatives in the House, and then 100 is added based on the number of senators in the Senate, plus 3 additional electoral votes are given to the District of Columbia. So that's how you get 538 electoral votes. And to win the presidency, you have to have a majority of the electoral